The sun was setting over the vast Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold as Elena Martinez stood at the edge of the property, her small suitcase clutched tightly in her trembling hands. She had traveled over 2,000 miles for this job, leaving behind a life that had crumbled into pieces, hoping that distance might somehow heal the wounds that still felt raw and fresh. The advertisement had been simple: a rancher in need of a housekeeper, room and board included. No experience necessary, just someone willing to work hard and start immediately. Elena had responded within hours, her desperation outweighing her hesitation, knowing that she had nowhere else to go and no one left to turn to. The ranch house stood before her now, weathered wood and stone that spoke of generations past, surrounded by endless fields where cattle grazed peacefully in the fading light. A man emerged from the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded denim shirt and a hat that had seen better days, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he approached. His name was William Harrison, though everyone called him Will, and he was 53 years old, a widower who had run this ranch alone for the past 7 years. He extended his hand with a warm smile that reached his eyes, welcoming her in a voice that carried the gentle drawl of someone who had lived his entire life under these big Montana skies. Elena shook his hand briefly, her grip weak and uncertain, unable to meet his gaze directly, her eyes fixed somewhere near his shoulder as she mumbled her greeting. Will noticed the bruises on her wrists, faded yellow and green, the kind that came from being held too tightly, and he noticed the way she flinched slightly when he moved too quickly. He asked no questions, simply picked up her suitcase and led her toward the house, explaining that her room was upstairs, second door on the right, and that dinner would be ready in about an hour. The house was cleaner than Elena had expected, lived in but organized, with photographs covering the mantel above the fireplace, pictures of a smiling woman with kind eyes who she assumed was Will's late wife. Her room was small but comfortable, with a window that overlooked the western pastures, and for the first time in months, Elena felt something that almost resembled safety. The first week passed in a blur of routines. She cooked breakfast before dawn, cleaned the house while Will worked the land, prepared dinner as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Will was patient and respectful, always knocking before entering a room, always saying please and thank you, treating her with a dignity that she had almost forgotten existed. But Elena remained closed off, speaking only when necessary, her answers brief and guarded, her movements careful and measured as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. She ate her meals quickly and quietly, often retreating to her room immediately after, finding comfort only in the solitude that felt both safe and suffocating. Will noticed everything, the way she never left food on her plate, as if she feared it might be her last meal, the way she startled at loud noises, the way she apologized constantly for things that needed no apology. One evening, as autumn began to creep into the air, Will found Elena sitting on the back porch staring out at nothing, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, despite the warmth of the evening. He sat down in the chair beside her, not too close, maintaining a respectful distance, and for several minutes they simply sat in silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "You know," Will said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "my wife Sarah used to sit right here every evening, said it was her favorite spot in the whole world." Elena said nothing, but she turned her head slightly, a small indication that she was listening, that perhaps some part of her wanted to hear what he had to say. "She passed 7 years ago this November. Cancer took her in less than 6 months from diagnosis to goodbye," Will continued, his voice thick with emotion that he no longer tried to hide. "For a long time after, I didn't think I was worth much of anything either. Couldn't see the point of getting up each morning. Couldn't figure out why I should keep going." Elena's breath caught slightly, the first real reaction she had shown in weeks, and her hands tightened their grip on her own arms. "But then, I realized something," Will said, turning to look at her directly, his eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "Our worth isn't determined by what others take from us or by the things we've lost. It's inherent, built into the very fact that we're here, that we're breathing, that we have the capacity to start again no matter how many times we've been knocked down." Tears began to stream down Elena's face, silent and steady, and she made no move to wipe them away, as if she had been holding them back for so long that she no longer had the strength to contain them. "I know you're running from something," Will said gently. "And I know you think you left behind everything that mattered, but you brought the most important thing with you. You brought yourself, and that's worth more than you can possibly imagine right now." Elena's voice was barely audible when she finally spoke, the words catching in her throat. "I don't know how to believe that anymore. I don't know how to see myself as anything other than broken. My husband," she paused, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "My ex-husband, he spent 5 years convincing me that I was nothing, that I was lucky he even tolerated me, that no one else would ever want someone as worthless as me. He controlled everything, what I wore, who I talked to, where I went, and when I finally found the courage to leave, he told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life because I'd never survive without him." Will listened without interruption, his expression a mixture of anger and compassion, his hands clenched tightly on the arms of his chair. "And the worst part," Elena continued, her voice breaking, "is that sometimes I believe him. Sometimes I wake up thinking maybe he was right. Maybe I am worthless, maybe I don't deserve anything better than what I had." "Elena," Will said firmly, leaning forward slightly, "may I tell you something, and I need you to really hear me?" She nodded slowly, finally meeting his eyes, seeing in them a sincerity that made her want to believe whatever he was about to say. That man was a liar and a coward. Anyone who needs to tear someone else down to feel powerful is neither strong nor truthful, Will stated clearly, his words carrying absolute conviction. "You survived 5 years of hell. You found the strength to leave. You traveled halfway across the country to start over, and you've worked harder in these past weeks than some people work in months. That's not worthless. That's extraordinary. That's the kind of courage that most people never have to find because they're never tested the way you were." Elena sobbed openly now, the kind of deep, wrenching cries that come from a place of profound pain, finally being acknowledged and witnessed by another human being. Will stood and walked to the porch railing, giving her space to release the emotions she had bottled up for so long, understanding that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply be present while someone falls apart. After several minutes, Elena's sobs quieted to shaky breaths, and she wiped her face with the sleeves of her shirt, embarrassed by her outburst. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the automatic apology slipping out before she could stop it. "Don't apologize for being human," Will said, turning back to face her. "Don't apologize for having feelings, for hurting, for needing to cry. One of the last things my Sarah said to me was that grief and pain need to be felt, not hidden, because only by moving through them can we find our way back to ourselves." Elena looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen but clearer somehow, as if the tears had washed away some of the fog that had surrounded her for so long. "How do I start?" she asked, her voice small but genuine. "How do I begin to believe that I'm worth something when I've spent so long being told that I'm not?" Will returned to his chair and sat down, considering his words carefully before speaking, understanding the weight and responsibility of this moment. "You start small," he said thoughtfully. "You start by noticing when you do something well, when you cook a good meal or clean something thoroughly, and instead of dismissing it, you acknowledge it. You start by catching yourself when you apologize unnecessarily, and you remind yourself that existing, taking up space, having needs and wants, these are not things that require apologies. You start by making small choices for yourself, choosing what you want for dinner, deciding how you want to spend your evening, exercising your right to have preferences and opinions. And gradually, over time, these small acts of self-recognition and self-respect build into something bigger, into a new foundation of understanding your own value." Elena listened intently, absorbing every word as if they were drops of water in a desert, and for the first time since arriving, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she might actually feel whole again. The weeks that followed brought subtle but significant changes. Elena began speaking more during meals, sharing small stories from her childhood, expressing opinions about ranch decisions, even laughing occasionally at Will's terrible jokes. She started taking walks in the evenings, exploring the property, marveling at the vastness of the land and the way it made her problems seem smaller, more manageable, less all-consuming. Will taught her to ride horses, patiently guiding her through the basics, celebrating her small victories when she managed to trot without fear, never criticizing her mistakes or impatience with her learning process. One morning in late October, Elena came downstairs to find Will sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread before him, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression troubled. "Everything okay?" she asked, genuinely concerned, realizing that she cared about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Will looked up and sighed heavily, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "Medical bills from Sarah's treatment. They keep finding new ones to send me, and honestly, I don't know how much longer I can keep this place running." Elena sat down across from him, looking at the numbers that represented not just debt but years of love and loss, sacrifice and struggle. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if I helped with the business side of things? I used to do bookkeeping before everything, and I might be able to find ways to reduce costs or increase efficiency." Will looked at her with surprise and gratitude. "Elena, you're already doing so much, you don't need to take on more responsibilities." "I want to," she said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been since her arrival. "You've given me more than just a job. You've given me a chance to remember who I am. Let me help you save this place." Over the following months, Elena threw herself into the ranch's finances, discovering inefficiencies, renegotiating contracts with suppliers, finding grants for small ranchers that Will had never known existed. She created spreadsheets and budgets, organized filing systems, even started a small online presence for the ranch to sell their beef directly to consumers at better prices. Will watched in amazement as this woman who had arrived broken and defeated transformed into a force of competence and determination, her intelligence and skills finally given space to flourish. By spring, the ranch was not only stable, but actually beginning to turn a modest profit, and Will insisted that Elena receive a proper salary instead of just room and board, over her initial protests. "You've earned this," he told her firmly. "You've saved this place, and more importantly, you've brought life back into it." One evening in early May, they sat together on the porch again, the same spot where their first real conversation had taken place 7 months earlier, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I got a letter from my lawyer today," Elena said quietly. "The divorce is final. Everything is officially over." "How do you feel?" Will asked gently, always giving her space to define her own emotions rather than assuming he knew what she should feel. "Free," Elena replied, a smile spreading across her face, genuine and bright. "I feel free and I feel grateful, and I feel like maybe, just maybe, I'm starting to understand what you meant about inherent worth." "I still have hard days," she admitted, "days when the old voices in my head are loud, when I doubt myself, when I'm scared, but they're getting fewer and farther between." Will reached over and gently took her hand, a gesture he had never attempted before, respecting her boundaries and her healing process but feeling that perhaps this moment called for it. "I'm not worth anything," Elena whispered, repeating the words that had defined her for so long, but this time her tone was different, reflective rather than defeated. Will squeezed her hand gently and smiled, that same warm smile that had greeted her on her first day. "No, Elena, you're worth everything. You're worth the sunrise that comes every morning promising new beginnings. You're worth the effort it takes to heal. You're worth the space you occupy in this world. You're worth the kindness you deserve, the respect you command, the future you're building, and anyone who ever made you believe otherwise was simply wrong." Elena squeezed his hand back, tears rolling down her cheeks again. But these were different tears, tears of relief and recognition, of wounds beginning to scar and strength beginning to root. "Thank you," she said simply, those 2 words carrying the weight of everything she couldn't yet articulate. Gratitude for his patience, his kindness, his unwavering belief in her worth when she had none for herself. As the stars began to appear above the Montana plains, 2 people sat together in comfortable silence, both having survived devastating losses, both having found unexpected salvation in kindness and hard work, and the simple act of seeing another person's inherent value. The ranch would continue to thrive, Elena would continue to heal and grow, and somewhere in the vast space between broken and whole, she would discover that worth isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It simply is, waiting patiently to be recognized and reclaimed. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.